The United Nations is now forecasting that up to 1.7 billion people could be thrown into poverty and destitution and hunger as a direct result of what's going on in the world right now. So the Ukraine crisis isn't solely to blame. We did have some problems anyway, but it's certainly been the catalyst to accelerate a lot of the problems, to increase prices further, and to make a lot of food unaffordable. The world was already experiencing problems with regards to food inflation, and that was predominantly driven by COVID and the rise in demand that we've seen all across the world over the last 12 months, and that's meant that we've seen increases in prices. Since the start of 2022, the price of wheat and corn and other basic items is up by around 40%. And that is completely unsustainable for a lot of the developing world. They just can't afford to pay for that. And when we look at the fertilizer prices, that means that we've got more cost increases to come, because a farmer will pay for fertilizer now, but he won't actually be selling his crops for another 3 to 6 to 9 months. So we're going to see that price increase passed on further down the road. And one of the direct knock-on impacts from this war has been a ban on exports. So more than 20 countries have now banned the export of wheat. So Ukraine were one of the first countries to do that. Russia has introduced a limited ban in terms of not providing any wheat or any other substances to unfriendly countries. But we've also seen a variety of other nations do the same thing because they're concerned about having enough food. So they don't want to be selling exports and then leave their home market short. So it's causing a lot of countries to become more nationalist in terms of their outlook rather than globalist. And to pick up on one of the messages that I gave you at the start of this video, the United Nations is now forecasting that up to 1.7 billion people could be thrown into poverty and destitution and hunger as a direct result of what's going on in the world right now. So the Ukraine crisis isn't solely to blame. We did have some problems anyway, but it's certainly been the catalyst to accelerate a lot of the problems, to increase prices further, and to make a lot of food unaffordable. And the issue that we've got here is that the Western world, bottom line, will be fine because they can afford to pay the higher prices. But the developing world, the emerging nations, and countries that are in crisis that spend up to 90% of their household budget on food just can't afford any movement in prices. So we're going to see a lot of people starving. We potentially could see famine, and we could see widespread food crises in a lot of countries, particularly in Africa, over the next 6 to 12 months. So it just highlights the fact once more that the problems that this war is causing are not just contained to Ukraine. There is a massive global knock-on impact, and food shortages and starvation is really one of the worst problems that we are seeing. The World Bank and the IMF and the food agencies are calling a potential catastrophe and asking all of the developed world to do something about it, to try to put measures in place that solves this crisis. Because if we don't, we could see large-scale famine all across the world. It's one thing for the developed nations to say that things are getting more expensive and we've got rising inflation and potentially we could come to a recession and we might have to tighten our belts and cut back a little bit. But for developing and emerging countries, they are potentially now looking at a humanitarian disaster. This could lead to millions of people starving to death all across the world. And that's obviously a much more serious issue than me talking about interest rates and the possibility that we're all heading towards some form of global financial crisis.